Yo, how are you doing, folks? Welcome to episode 6 of the Simpa Life Podcast. We are joined, as always, by Mr. Maca MC. How are you doing, brother?
Not too bad, not too bad. All well and fine this evening. I've put the thing up there. I didn't get caught out this time. I totally did. I'm just buying time to actually find the words to say. I hope everybody's doing well this evening, and I'm really looking forward to this one. This should be good.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we are joined tonight by Professor Mike Barnes, who is a consultant neurologist and medical cannabis expert. I first met Mike a few years ago when he actually attended one of the very first Durham City Cannabis Club events, Hemp Gardens. And Mike has been involved in the cannabis pharmaceutical, I suppose, and research industry part of this for a few decades now, wouldn't it be, Mike?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I started late 1990s with working a little bit for GW Pharma. Sorry about that, but they developed the first licensed cannabis medicine called Sativex, and I was very involved with their license application, basically. Yeah, so that goes back 20 plus years.
Yeah, and obviously since then you've done quite a lot in the past few years. Obviously you were instrumental, I would say, in the passing of the medical cannabis laws here in the UK in 2018. You released a book, A Beginner's Guide to Medical Cannabis, in 2019. You've obviously worked quite intimately with Hannah Deacon as well, Alfie Dingley's mum, who again I would say has been rather instrumental in the foundational changes in the law in the UK around medical cannabis. What are the sort of projects have you been involved in the past few years then?
Well, it's been an interesting few years. After I was involved with GW about 20 plus years ago, then nothing much happened for about 15 years because Sativex wasn't much used. NICE said it wasn't cost effective, and it probably wasn't. So there was really very little momentum, if you like, certainly in the medicinal cannabis space until about 4 years ago, I suppose. Yeah, then I was involved in doing a report for the thing called the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Drug Policy Reform, which is a short and snappy title. And with my daughter, who's a psychologist, we reviewed all the evidence for efficacy of cannabis. Then, as you said, I was involved with Alfie Dingley's license application to the Home Office, which predates the law change that occurred about 4 or 5 months after that in November 18. And then I was involved a little bit with all sorts of bits and pieces. We set up the Academy of Medical Cannabis, which is a doctor's teaching program. We set up one of the first cannabis clinics, which was sadly, we'll probably come to that, but it was sadly private sector. I'd love it to see it in the NHS, free as it should be to everybody, but for reasons we might discuss, it's only available privately at the moment. So we set one of those up, and we founded the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society, which is a sort of group for any clinicians, not just doctors, but any clinicians with interest in cannabis, which is about 150 members now. And then I've been working closely with Hannah, as you've said, Alfie Dingley's mum, who's a very, very capable lady and very capable campaigner, one of the best media profile campaigner in the country, I think, for medical cannabis. And we set up a thing called Maple Tree Consultancy. So we were beginning to see people ask us loads of questions about how do we get into this space from abroad, from Canada, from Israel, from Australia. People were asking me to do teaching. With some parliamentary lobbying and that sort of thing. We were both asked to do separately. So we thought, well, why don't we do that together? Because her campaigning background and my medical background is quite a good fit. So that's how we started Maple Tree about a year ago now, I think. So I'm now mainly involved with that. That keeps me off the streets.
Good to see you keeping out of trouble. Well, I suppose as we said before, could you maybe sort of speak a bit more about how the law changed? Because obviously, as I said, you were quite instrumental within that.
I think, in fairness, it changed. Politicians are funny people, aren't they? They respond to media pressure. They don't respond to academic, scientific persuasion, generally speaking. They hide behind it sometimes, like COVID, but generally they respond to media pressure. And the Alfie's campaign was very well done by End Our Pain, people Peter Carroll and Will DePayer were behind the campaign. It was very strong media campaign. I wasn't really much to do with that campaign directly, but I think it's that campaign and ultimately then Alfie's license. Once they'd given that license to Alfie in summer 18, then of course it was very, very difficult to resist the pressure to give it to why just Alfie? You know, they had to enlarge it to initially. The thought was just the children with epilepsy. Then, of course, people began to say, well, why just children with epilepsy? Why not adults with pain or Crohn's disease or anxiety or whatever? So I think that the pressure became unstoppable. And finally, with due respect, in a sense, to the then Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, they changed the law. I was surprised that the legal parts were so liberal. They really are. I mean, people criticize the government and Matt Hancock and in one sense, rightly, because there's things the government could do better. But actually, the fundamental underlying law change was really quite liberal. A doctor can prescribe for any condition. Mm-hmm. There's no limitation to the conditions doctors can prescribe for now. And we can go through the problems I see. It's just doctors on the specialist register, so it's only hospital consultants, and they don't know anything about cannabis any more than the GP. So why not GPs? You know, it was made difficult to get it on the NHS, in fact, if not totally impossible at the moment. And then the various guidelines came out, like from NICE, that were next to useless. And so, you know, the law change was great. And I thought, yeah, it's great. We've done that. I can now retire. But actually, it was the start of a long journey. And we're still a long way from proper access to cannabis for those who need it.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think you touched on a few of the either we could, I suppose, debate whether they're intentional or consequential barriers that have been put in place to access, because the wording of the law and the way that it is set up suggests that anyone should be able to access either a cannabis-based medicinal product or raw cannabis as it stands. Yeah. But we've obviously seen with the limitation of it being through private clinics and through pay-to-play, I suppose, in one way of expressing it. But you also touched on something that I hit firsthand yesterday in a conversation with the GP on a phone consultation. I often on my platform talk about my own mental health. So my anxiety has been really bad recently. Combination of not having access to the certain strains that I normally grow. And so I've ended up with some things that are far more energetic for what I particularly need. So I ended up having a conversation with this GP about potential short-term remedies, including sort of beta blockers and things like this. And we got stuck in this loop around cannabis until ultimately he said that, as far as I'm aware, it will fry your brain long-term, but you clearly know more about this than me, so I will shut up. So it's kind of, it was a nice little win for me as an activist and for somebody that sort of protects the plant and tries to speak for education. Oh, the camera went.
Keep going.
But it was still frustrating that he's almost surrendered to it of going, well, you're a medical professional. You're somebody who clearly at one time or another dedicated your life to this craft. And now I feel that you're practicing medicine with one or both hands tied behind their backs.
I think that's true. I mean, there's certainly quite a few doctors, I couldn't put a number on it, who want to prescribe cannabis, who don't necessarily understand it. So there's some doctors understandably don't want to prescribe because they don't know what they're doing. In the nicest possible way. They've never been taught about it. I wouldn't want my GP to prescribe something he or she doesn't know anything about. But that's overcomable. You know, there's online training courses now, so a GP or a consultant interested can learn all about it. And I think they really ought to. Even if they don't want to prescribe, I think they have a moral obligation to find out about it so they can advise their patients, this is good for you, or might be good for you, or not good for you. It's not good for everybody. I don't know about it, but I support you finding out about it and going to get it from some source like the cannabis clinics or whatever. So I think a lot of doctors it's sad that many doctors are putting, frankly, their own, I'll be blunt, they're putting their own career, their own employer, their own prospects of promotion, their own, but they're hiding behind these guidelines. And I think doctors, I brought up, perhaps I'm old-fashioned, brought up that doctors really meant to do the best thing for their patients, regardless of what the bureaucracy around them says. But there's not many doctors who are prepared to stand up and say, this is the right thing to do for this person. I may or may not know about it, but it's the right thing to do, and I'll support them doing it. So I think it's a sad reflection on the British medical establishment. There are so few people prepared to basically put their pen where their mouth is. That's not totally mixing my metaphors.
Also, though, I mean, to sort of add to that, you'd imagine that there's an awful lot of people that are completely swamped by process because of the how much paperwork people have to do. Do you know what I mean? If you're a doctor and stuff like that, what percentage of your time is actually filling out data and stuff like that instead of actually being a doctor?
Yeah, I don't. Well, as a neurologist, or was very little actually.
Really?
And I've never been paperwork in general practice for all I know, but actually for you, if you're sitting in a clinic, NHS or private, doesn't matter. You talk to someone, whatever it takes, half an hour, 45 minutes, whatever. Talk to them, and then you say, right, I'm going to write you a prescription. You write the prescription, and here you go. You hand it to them. There you go.
Yeah.
So the paperwork you have to do for that is not really a lot. Okay, it's a little more complicated than that. Getting to that point, there's a bureaucracy about getting the right prescription pad for a controlled drug. You need to be trained in it, although there's no compulsory training. But the paperwork isn't an issue. It really isn't. It's no worse than any other controlled drug or specials medicine. Drugs that are unlicensed in the UK are called, you can prescribe called specials. And there's a little about prescribing a special than there is about prescribing aspirin or whatever. But it's really not a big deal. I think that's another feeble excuse. It's not an extra layer of bureaucracy for writing a cannabis prescription.
Fair enough.
So have you, obviously you work more in the private sector, I suppose. Have you come up against or seen much within the NHS or the governmental infrastructure that's opposition to this? Because surely it's part and parcel with, obviously, the updated NICE guidelines are supposed to take care of this, but is there no centralized education within? Is there any intention for it to be established?
Oddly, the tradition in British medicine is the government or the health department don't provide training. It's up after you've got qualified as a doctor, you do your exams, and that's it. If you want to then specialize in some particular aspect of your subject, like for example, Botox, that came out 15, 20 years ago, you could just go and do it. I think that's wrong, because a doctor could just go out and start sticking Botox in people. And likewise, at the moment, a doctor can start writing a prescription for cannabis. There's not many doing it, but they can do with no training. And there's 3 or 4 doctors in this country now who are not part of a cannabis clinic setup, who've just sitting in their rooms, whether they may be at the Nuffield or whatever, just writing cannabis prescriptions for people without knowing what the hell they're doing. And that worries me. We've seen massive amounts of cannabis given to people. So the doctor clearly doesn't know what he or she's doing. And I would love to see, I don't think we can make it compulsory in this country, sadly, but I would love to see some semi-compulsion, call it that, for doctors not to prescribe till they know what they're doing. And it's so easy. It's not difficult to train in cannabis medicine. It's a bit different. Prescribing a botanical is a bit different from prescribing a pharmaceutical product. Sure, it takes a little more training, a bit more time and energy and effort, but it's not that difficult. So I would love to see doctors doing this properly trained to do it. We've got the ironic situation at the moment as the public, or members of the public, know a damn sight more about cannabis than the doctors do.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the issue. There are some doctors, I won't say all, because I don't think it's all, who are arrogant. They're difficult. They don't like patients coming into their surgery saying, I think I want this, will you prescribe it for me?
Yeah.
The immediate reaction is, mind your own business, I'm the doctor. And I think that's sad. I mean, the more intelligent, the more open, generally younger, but not always, doctors should be open to this and learn from the patient. I've learned a huge amount from talking to people like you, Simpa, like Hannah Deacon. I mean, my knowledge of this space has really come from the consumer, if you like. So it's an interesting patient-driven revolution. But I think that is part of the problem.
Indeed. I think Maca alluded to something in previous episodes of sort of the idea of a centralized database. Obviously, if this isn't then going to be on the NHS, there's obviously reasons for competition and whatnot why you wouldn't want to make any of this too open source. But do you know if there's any cohesion between the British clinics to compile and release data? Because we're constantly being told by politicians at the pulpit that we need more research, when the clinics, the way that they're operating in terms of people coming back through the doors for the consultations, means that they're getting a really rounded picture of individual consumption around specific conditions.
Yeah.
So this is something that we discussed, I think, but long before this, when again we were in Hemp Gardens, about what can be done at both sides of it. Because since then, obviously, we've both gone and done our individual things to our individual success. But I still feel that there is no cohesion between it. And as you said before, that lived experience of the consumer, I think, is the missing key for this. Because there's people out there that have been growing their own cannabis for 20, 30 years, treating their own ailments, and anybody that'll ask, and never even thought of, oh, this is medical in that sense. Do you know what I mean? And if we continue to allow them to be sort of stigmatized or inadvertently, I'm back. Sorry. Inadvertently, sort of pigeonholed and stigmatized and kept away from this, I feel that we're going to be 10, 20 years behind, because we're going to really miss that information.
I mean, I'd love to see some sort of coordinated approach. It isn't the only way the only thing that's happening at the moment is the Drug Science 2021 program, as I'm sure you know, is trying to recruit 20,000 people by the end of next year. I think that's a bit ambitious. I don't think we'll get to that number, but nevertheless, let's say we get to 10,000, which would be great. And what they're doing is collating that data. So it's a big, probably the world's biggest audit collection. And I think that's absolutely great. I mean, that's really is evidence. The problem we got, of course, is that the licensing authorities, the authorities with influence like NICE, really treat cannabis as a pharmaceutical product. And they only really take seriously a double-blind placebo-controlled study, which is perfectly good for a single molecule pharmaceutical product, but it's no good for the plant, because it doesn't lend itself to a double-blind placebo-controlled trial. Because, I don't need to tell you, or the audience really, but it's thousands of different cultivars, chemovars, whatever in cannabis. You can't really standardize it. You can control quality, but it's never going to. Pushing it down a pharmaceutical route is a complete waste of time, because it will never get to the other end of that long-winded route, millions and millions of pounds later. And big pharmaceutical companies who can afford that for their own products aren't going to afford it for the plant, because you can't patent it, so they're not going to make any money. I understand that. Yeah. So if you push it down a pharmaceutical route, we'll be doing this podcast in 10 years' time, and we'll be about 100. So the government has got to, Maple Tree, what I work with, is producing a white paper at the moment to develop the UK medical cannabis industry. And part of that is to ask the government to set up an office of medicinal cannabis, like they got in Holland, in Denmark, I think, and other parts of the world, where you've got experts who can look at the plant as a plant. They can assess its efficacy and its safety. They can license imports to get into the country. They can look at the evidence base. They look at it as a plant, not a pharmaceutical. I'd love to see that. It's not asking for more money or more work, because this is being done through the Home Office, through the Health Department, the MHRA, etc., etc., etc. But they're looking at it in the wrong, deliberately or not. They're looking at it from totally the wrong standpoint, because they don't understand we're looking at a plant and we're not looking at a pharmaceutical product.
Yeah, this is something I wanted to discuss with you, actually, is the terminology and sort of the way that they created medical cannabis, let's call this a hyphenated word, seems to not fit into a schedule in the UK. So you've got substances like Sativex, which is Schedule 4. Then you've got raw cannabis, which sits Schedule 1. And then the definition that they've put for medical cannabis in Schedule 2 is a cannabis-based medicinal product designed for human consumption. So technically, that's not even covering the raw plant. So there's still this discrepancy, and I agree that they're looking at the same way that the pharmaceutical industry, or I suppose Western medicine, has for over a century now. They find a substance that's used either culturally or within a certain subset of people. They study it. They find the single extractable or synthesizable compound, replicate that, and then that's the license controlled product. But again, the synergy between cannabinoids, flavonoids, and terpenes means that we can't discount any of this. So somebody could literally, as it were, accidentally grow the, pardon the expression, but the cure for cancer in their cupboard, and no one would ever know, because the pharmaceutical companies are spending cumulatively billions to get to these single compounds, as you said, because they can then patent the extraction process and create these end products.
And getting isolates is academically interesting. You can work out what CBN or CBC or CB actually does in isolation. Promote human knowledge. It's great, and all the other 147 cannabinoids. I have no problem with academics doing that, but I mean, there is no doubt at all that the entourage effect is very real, and the full plant, with all its cannabinoids, its terpenes, and its flavonoids, and everything else, is a better medicine than the individual isolates. That is I don't think that's people will challenge it in the pharmaceutical industry, but it is absolutely clear that that is the case, and so you've got to treat it as a whole plant. Getting isolates, and we look at Epidiolex. Nothing wrong with Epidiolex. It's a good product for the children with epilepsy, but it's virtually a CBD isolate, and we know that the full plant products for the children simply work better. You get more children with a better efficacy and less side effects. So I understand why GW pushed it down the isolate route, because 20 years ago there's not a cat in hell's chance of getting a full plant licensed. So I don't criticize them for doing that, but there's no doubt that the full plant works better. And it's a shame, even NICE suggested we use Nabilone, which is synthetic THC. I mean, why in God's name do you want to push a synthetic THC when you've got the whole plant growing on your doorstep? It's basically daft. Yeah,
okay, fair enough. Answers so many questions. It's hard to actually ask you any questions because you cover so much. It's like I'm finding myself going, no, it's not a negative in any way. I'm just like, okay, he's covered that. That's great. It's really, really good.
Okay.
It flows really, really nice. That's my lovely way of using words, as you can tell. But so I mean, when we talk about medical cannabis as a category, we're really talking about synthetic cannabinoids, really, are with medical application, right? That's really what we're talking about.
Well, some are, yeah. I mean, when I talk about medical cannabis, and everyone says, well, the cannabis is cannabis, it's a plant, and it has medical uses, and it has spiritual uses, and it has recreational uses, and I totally agree with that. It's the same plant. But clearly there are differences between using that plant for medicinal purposes and using it for recreational purposes, simple in terms of, for example, the quantity, percentage of THC versus CBD. Yeah. So there are real differences between their actual practical usage. But when I talk about, let's call it medicinal cannabis, I'm talking about the full spectrum proper plant product. And I won't prescribe any synthetic. I think they're a waste of time, energy, and effort. And I don't want to put money into the hands of a company that's made a synthetic product when I've got a perfectly good plant growing here. Thank you very much.
That's fair enough. Now, just to sort of keep you on the recreational side of things, and I won't put you under too much pressure here, but something that you alluded to there was predominant recreational use does tend to have high levels of THC versus CBD, for instance, right? That's a given. That you can chalk that down to whatever you want. Preference, prohibition, which is a big thing for me, but that's not the point I'm trying to make. As a personal thing, like because of prohibition, say for instance, I am actually genuinely intrigued as how one-to-ones would work as a recreational user, if you could call it like that, because I would class myself, say, as something somewhat of an extremely productive stoner, not a stereotypical, chilled out one kind of a thing. So I'm actually fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by the prophylactic side, or the prophylactic argument, because the promotion of obviously homeostasis and the reinforcement of the endocannabinoid system is very appealing to me. It is, right? And obviously you're going to get much more of that in my opinion, with full extract products and stuff like that. So when I say sort of recreational, and I say, medical versus recreational, I am genuinely subscribed to, say, the prophylactic side of use. I just wondered if you had any opinion on that.
Yeah, well, it's a clear, I think politically it's useful to differentiate between medicinal use and recreational use for politics, because there's a lot of politicians who have been very helpful and very useful for pushing the medicinal debate, but are very against recreational use. I think we've got to respect that, because I don't think we will be where we are today, even though we've got a long way to go. There wouldn't be 2,500 people in this country got a legal prescription if we'd, if you like, muddied the waters and said we want recreational use as well as medicinal use. So I think as a political strategy, it was essential to differentiate the two. Although I totally accept it's a very false dichotomy. And there's a big overlap. I mean, if people go home in the evening and just want to chill out and relax, is that medicinal use or is that recreational use? I mean, you could debate that forever. There's a big, if you like, gray area in the middle where people are using it effectively for wellness, if you like. Perfectly legitimate use, I think. Right at one end of the spectrum is just purely for recreational use. And right at the other end of the spectrum, perhaps the children with epilepsy, or if you like, purely medicinal use. But there's a big area in between, and it's a bit false to differentiate between them. But as I say, politically, it was very useful and important to differentiate between them.
And that's a fair point.
Agreed. Very, very good answer. So I think with the whole sort of rec and medical thing, as you said, it works very well to create a binary conversation. So then the average politician who sees all of these experts coming in day after day, touting all of these things, doesn't have the time to do their own independent research. You can give them this kind of black and white. Same with THC, CBD. And we've had these conversations now where effectively I still tout it as a marketing trick, the fact that we call CBD non-psychoactive, which I don't necessarily believe to be true. It's just not psychoactive in the same way THC is. So as Maca
it's psychoactive, Simpa, isn't it? I mean, if it helps epilepsy and anxiety and a bit of pain and sleep, I mean, it's psychoactive. If you interpret psychoactive as having an effect on the brain's functions, it's psychoactive, clearly.
Yeah.
And I think you can argue with me because you know better than I do, but I think in fairly high dose CBD can also give you a sort of, if you like, a mild high. Would that be a reasonable
sedation? Really, I find.
Yeah, I understand that again, why we differentiate between them, but I don't know what I prefer. Intoxicating, some people use, but then you get a bit muddled up with alcohol because it's nothing like that effect. So I'm not quite sure of a better word than psychoactive, non-psychoactive, but you're quite right. That's a very false distinction. I try not to use it myself. I tend to use intoxicating, even though I don't think that's the right word either, frankly. High doesn't get too high.
Well, exactly this. All the language that we have that has been constructed for us, most of it has been done with prejudice. You know, they've done it with a certain sense of this needs to be derogatory. This, so we've inherited this language, whether it be as experts or as consumers and activists and advocates, and we're still trying to cobble it all together. So you've still got, obviously now it's so entrenched in America with the idea of marijuana. And then so you've then got to the Canadians calling cannabinoids CBDs. So really confusing. The way they're writing it is CBD.
Very confusing. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So there is no standardization in the terminology. The same as you said before about the cannabis are cultivars, not sort of strains. And then there's still the mass market, as it were, especially around recreational, and still in a lot of ways in the emerging medical market, is we're being sold on sort of strains in the idea of breaking down the profile. Not breaking down the profile. And even when we do, we're not educating people on what terpenes have certain effects. Obviously, individuals have different responses, but I still feel that this oversimplistic thing of going, well, we'll give you a 2-to-1 CBD to THC.
Yeah, it's too simplistic.
The consumer needs to be informed. And I feel that perhaps I'm a little bit paranoid, but I feel that it's a way of disempowering the consumer from then going, oh, I know this strain. I can go online, Google this, get the seed and grow it at home for a quarter of the price that it cost me for a consultation fee.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a bit of a tendency at the moment. CBD is good, THC is bad. And we know that's absolutely not true. You often need to come in, and let alone all the other cannabinoids and terpenes and everything else. So I think it's also not helpful. The CBD over-the-counter market is also responsible a bit for pushing that simplistic view of life. So I think honestly, I think we need better terminology. I've often thought that if cannabis could be rechristened with a totally new name, like we discovered some new orchid in the Amazon jungle or something, and people came out and said, waving this about, look, this is a really useful plant. It helps anxiety and epilepsy and bowel disease and may have anti-cancer problems. This is what the medical community have been falling over backwards to understand it. Because it's called cannabis and associated with, dreadful anti-establishment, anti-social types, stoners, potheads, all that stuff. It's that is the mindset, and I think that's the mindset of some of the doctors. This plant is bad; it can't be doing any good. As the old doctor said, it's going to fry your brain.
Yeah, like those old adverts, right? The fried egg.
Yeah. It's just ignorance, and people need to educate themselves. And I think doctors are really, really bad at embracing this. Don't want all of them to prescribe it, but they should embrace it and understand it and not spout such nonsense about it.
But is it again? Sorry to come back to the sort of view on the system, right? But like it feels like there isn't a centralized focus on the function or the reinforced functioning of the human body as a sort of an absolute endpoint to connect all of this data together. It feels like, we have this, treat it with this. Do you know that kind of way? That's what it feels like to me. So I'm wondering, I mean, if we could flip that around, I don't think we'd have the same sort of mindset with doctors, is my point, I guess.
I think the world is changing. And you're quite right. At the moment, pharmaceutical medicine has been developed. So if you've got a problem X, you take a tablet Y. As simple as that. Doesn't matter what the rest of the body's doing. But I think I'm right in saying there's now a bit of a change in society that recognizes the concept of whole body health, wellness. Now, some people have been going on about that for decades, complementary practitioners, herbalists, acupuncturists. I mean, absolutely great. But there's a little bit of a change in society is now less accepting of the pharmaceutical solution. You have a pain, you take a painkiller. Don't think what the cause of that pain is. Put it into the social context. You may be sleeping next to your wife who keeps kicking you in the night. There could be lots of reasons why you don't sleep well. Doctors need to look more broadly at medicine, and I think cannabis gives them that opportunity. So I think the time for cannabis is come because it is a holistic wellness product that balances the whole body. But that's an alien concept for many doctors who've been trained and brought up with a pharmaceutical product equals a solution to this symptom.
Yeah, I entirely agree. And I often talk about this in the modern world. It's the compartmentalization of specialized information. Do you know what I mean? So that the left hand doesn't know what the right's doing. So these doctors themselves, they'll know basically the back of the pack, as it were, the leaflet that comes out of a pharmaceutical product of basic symptoms. And then what they'll know to do is, if that's happening, take this other drug. And then from that, they can read. And you end up with this spectrum of crap. And I think that we as a society have become too expectant and on arriving at a GP surgery and getting a piece of paper. If we don't get drugs from the doctor, then he's not doing his job. He doesn't care about me. I've gone in, he hasn't helped me. But if you go into a doctor and they should be asking exactly like these wellness questions: how are you sleeping? How is your diet? How's your job? How's your relationship?
Exactly.
And without these, how can we have this? I mean, if you look in mental health, for example, I think it took till DSM-4 until we actually basically recognized that bereavement is a thing. That if you've lost someone that's died as a family member, you're allowed to be sad for a little while. Because up to that point, you could be prescribed SSRIs, some of the highest, and frankly, as I would consider most intoxicating of these substances, that irreparably change the construct of your neurochemistry without the doctor ever asking about any of those base questions.
Yeah, I agree. Though so obviously we have to generalize. There's some really good GPs who are very holistic. I think that's the one mistake the government, well, they made several, but the one mistake the government made was not allowing GPs to prescribe. I think definitely GPs will be better prescribers because to generalize, they're more holistic. They tend to look at the whole patient problems and the family and everything else, whereas a specialist, by their training, only focuses on one particular bit. There might be a child epilepsy specialist, they might be a Crohn's disease specialist or an MS specialist, whatever it is. But they're trained not to look at the whole person because they've got all that detailed knowledge of that one little bit. And so I think they're just the wrong people to prescribe cannabis, which doesn't generally cure diseases generally speaking. It helps symptoms, it helps pain, it helps anxiety, and they're GP issues, generally speaking. So that was GP should be prescribing this, not hospital specialists.
I mean, there's an argument to be said as well that, you know, if you were to change the system now as well, that would be more sort of individually focused on the patient, then obviously the workload would increase per GP, and then you'd have more weight on, say, the NHS, and you'd have obviously more, you know, obviously a larger workload to deal with. So you're going to have more doctors, which is fine, but you're going to need to alleviate an awful lot of weight that is on the NHS as much as possible. Now, when you can do that through recreational, sorry to bring it back again, but the only reason I say it is if you look at it from an industrial point of view as well, and taxation and the potential prophylactic use that I mentioned before as a general not standardized use. I can't remember the terminology that you had, but you know, if that was achievable, then you can imagine an awful lot of weight would be lifted from portions of the NHS and allow
I think
more of that
individualism to allow
individualism.
people to look after their own health. Also, I think the NHS is a bit too doctor-centric because, you know, do you really need a doctor to talk about lifestyle and things? Can't we train
It's true.
other clinicians, nurses, physios in the right context?
Very true.
Health practitioners? Do you need a doctor for everything? And the answer is no, you don't. Particularly for lifestyle issues, doctors really aren't trained in that as well as others could be trained. So, yeah, if we focus all on doctors, we need a damn sight more. But I don't think we should focus on doctors. And I think there's a lot that other practitioners can do and the person can do for themselves with the right training and background and support. And that's what I like about cannabis. It's a bit of it can be at least a self-help treatment, if you like.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, very, very much so. I think actually I had a little sort of glint in my eye there, as you may have seen, viewers. Having a thought there, if the NHS was to produce its own raw cannabis and then be able to prescribe it, the protocols and procedures of which it's created would create pharmaceutical grade cannabis. Therefore, as a harm reduction mechanism, surely then, one of the best things to do would be to propagate that. Because one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, does the medical cannabis establishment worry about skunk psychosis? Is there any talk amongst these clinicians about cannabis-induced psychosis? Because this seems to be the biggest bat that they beat us with on the recreational side of it. Whereas on the medical side of it, there's almost this thing of, ours doesn't do that. It's skunk. When actually some of the strains we know, Sativex, was
do with us. Exactly. No, I think those who know about cannabis know that is an issue for some. I mean, I wouldn't prescribe it for those with an active schizophrenia or an active psychosis until that episode has settled down. I wouldn't prescribe it if somebody just had a heart attack or someone with a heart rhythm problem. Sure, there's like any medicine, it's not right for everybody. But I mean, the psychosis is way overblown by real readers of the Daily Mail and whatever. And it is an issue, but it is a tiny issue in the scheme of things. There was a lovely paper by Hickman that showed you had to stop 29,000 male, because it's more of a problem with men, male users from smoking cannabis to prevent one episode of schizophrenia. Now, if the complication rate is that low, then, we can't forget it. We've got to be sensible about it, but it is not really an issue. And I know some of it's a very odd thing. The most supportive branch of medicine for this has been psychiatry. I've trained more psychiatrists than any other branch of medicine. And you'd think, when you think about it, they're the guys that see the cannabis dependency syndromes, the cannabis use disorder, the psychosis in the users. So you'd think of all the branches of medicine, they'd be those that say, whoa, we don't want to widen the use of this. We're going to inundate our clinics with people who've gone mad on cannabis. But they're not. They see that and put it in proportion, and they can see the benefit for anxiety and PTSD, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder. So it's been interesting that those I thought would be against it are actually those who are for it. And those who don't really know much about either the bad side of cannabis or the good side of cannabis are those who are bleating in the wings, not knowing what they're talking about, particularly the British Pediatric Neurologists Association, which I have a particular antipathy to.
There was, a lot of the established institutions are still very much sticking to status quo. And I think, as you said, there needs to be this kind of crossover in education between advocacy and research. It's pointless. All of these academics, no offense, sort of in your chambers, sort of preaching away how you're doing this. But if we're not connected to the physical plant, if these clinicians themselves don't know what the plant looks like, what it smells like, I mean, this might get a bit hippie-ish, so I apologize, but the plants themselves, if you grow them, you spend time with them, they make you feel, they have this real sort of radiance to them. The fact that you're taking control of your own medicine is in and of itself an act of healing.
Exactly. That is therapeutic in its own right. I mean, it's not right for everybody. You know, clearly children, whatever, or busy people or very disabled people can't grow their own. Sure. Yeah. But those who do and can, they get a better product, generally speaking, because they can grow the exact chemovar, let's call it that helps their particular conditions or multiple strains. But they get the sort of therapeutic benefit of actually nurturing and growing and doing something about their own health. And we're never going to get the rich variety from the cannabis producers from Canada that you can get. What is that? How many chemovars are there? 2.5, 3. Leafly website at about 2,500. And
that's just the ones that have gone through the commercial markets.
Exactly, yeah. So, we're never going to get a doctor even thinking, and I've got 3,000 things to think about here. Which one is suitable for you? That's never going to happen. So I think there's a great benefit for those who can do it is to grow their own. So I'm totally support grow your own.
Mm-hmm. Well, then I know Maca's, I can see him biting at the bit there. We discussed on a previous podcast the idea of using technology to correlate all of this data together, open source. So as you've said, there is no, or there seems to be no cohesion in the private sector. The public sector, as it seems, is incompetent on all means. And I don't think that's because of the people who make up that institution. I think it's the idiots who decide the funding and the direction of those institutions. And I think that's left the UK at a point where I believe we're still the world's largest exporter of medical cannabis. I'm surprised.
Yeah, they said that. I think we must have been overtaken by now by the Canadians or something. But I mean, GW did certainly produce the largest amount of cannabis for export in the world, ironically, and none of it comes to the UK. So we have to import it at great expense from other countries. Well, how ridiculous is that? Yeah. But anyway.
We know this as an environmentalist as well, Mike. I hate this current system. Yeah. We can grow most of the strains, the cultivars, whatever you want to call them out there. You can crossbreed with some really hardy ruderalis plants, and they can become set for any climate. Yeah. We can use the technology that we derive from the waste material of this, because this is another thing that I wanted to ask you about. Yeah. What is the medical industry doing with its byproducts? All of the cannabis husk and herd, all of the potential industrial equipment that can make supercapacitor batteries, that can make ethanol, which is 5 times cleaner than petroleum fuels, and run in the engines we have now. It feels like
it's a wonderful plant. We should be using the plant. I mean, hemp obviously is bred more for industrial uses than the high THC plants, but we should be using all the plant because the OB is a wonderfully useful plant. And the crazy thing in this country, there's many crazy things, but I'll prattle on again. Getting an industrial hemp license, which is a little bit easier than a high THC license, that's great, but then you have to destroy the flower and the leaves. Well, that's crazy. So you're actually throwing away a perfectly good product, and then you're importing the same product to sell over the counter at Holland and Barrett and whatever. I mean, that makes absolutely no economic sense. If you just purely look at it economically, why on earth haven't we got a good quality UK cannabis, by which I mean hemp and high THC cultivars? We're ideally placed. We can do that. Okay, we're not going to do it quite as cheaply as Colombia or the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where they're down to 10 cents or less a gram. But, we can do good quality, consistent product. Let's embrace that industry, particularly after COVID. I thought we needed jobs. We needed tax income.
Nationalize it.
Never thought I'd heard myself say we need tax income, for God's sake, but I'd rather it went to something useful in the government than in the hands of a criminal fraternity, frankly.
Absolutely. Well, we're already paying tax on this since 2010. Since 2010, we pay a premium every year. on the illegal market. So this is the frustration of it. As a grower, I pay tax on my electric, on my water, on my seeds, on my newts, on the equipment. You know what I mean? I am paying far more into this than a lot of the other corporate entities in other industries in this country. So it's frustrating that there is this entire, I don't want to call them an underbelly, but I suppose the underbelly of the industry that people don't see. They can see these end clinics, they can see the nice articles in the mainstream media and whatnot, and hear these good news stories around children's fits going from 400 or 500 in a week to 1 or 2 a month, if that. But they're still missing the average consumer. They're still trivializing and demonizing the average hoodie who's just trying to smoke a joint in the corner because his mom doesn't want him doing that devil's lettuce in the house. You know, the stigma still pervades, and I just worry that
it does. Yeah, you're right.
That until we can have an open conversation in the mainstream media about what actually is recreational, because as we said, it's a misnomer, this rec versus medical argument. Ultimately, you can use cannabis one day because you're in pain and it'll help with the pain. The next you can't sleep, so you could use it for that. The next there's an anti-nausea agent to stimulate appetite. There's so many other different variants for this that if we then create specific pharmaceutical drugs for this, rather than someone going, okay, for those 4 incidents, I need to go and buy 4 different drugs. I need to go visit a doctor and get 4 different prescriptions for those base things. Whereas they could, if they had, again, the education and the information, the ability to grow those strains at home. I mean, you spoke before of hemp. There's a wonderful thing that because of the consequence of prohibition and we've pushed THC down, it's allowed for other minor cannabinoids to become more prominent. So we're seeing higher CBC, we're seeing higher CBG, and other sort of branch cannabinoids. And obviously, as you said, the synthesization of the synthetics allow us to view them more. But again, I would argue that if industry could just be allowed to let these things breed, if you leave hemp in a field for a few seasons, it stresses itself to cannabis in our poor language terms, but you know, a higher level of THC. So I then think of, can you imagine the potential of this plant if we stop trying to restrain and restrict and control this thing?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It is an extraordinarily flexible, useful plant, economically, socially, medically, whatever. It's an extraordinary plant, really, and we ought to embrace it and not demonize it. You're absolutely right.
This question I want to get your thoughts on, which is obviously we're now 2 years down the road. As you said before, there is no real impediment against any condition qualifying to be prescribed cannabis. It's just, I suppose, the financial barrier and information, people knowing what clinics and how they can access them, etc. But how do you sort of feel about the continuation of the criminalization of potentially millions of people who are, let's call, I'm air quoting here for people that are listening, genuine medical consumers?
Yeah, I think it's appalling. I mean, it's public knowledge, I think. So the guy at the moment, Tony Bevington, an 80-year-old guy with chronic kidney failure, is growing his own, helping his symptoms out of pain. It is appalling that someone's thinking of taking him to court for growing those in his own, wherever he grows them, loft, back garden. That's just appalling and totally unnecessary. And what I would love to see is, that changing. I'm not a great believer in decriminalization. I think that's a sort of halfway house to nowhere, because it's a step in the right direction. I'd like to see some sort of recognition that people who are using it, let's call it medical purposes, can use it unmolested, if you like, by the police forces and the public. Now, how you differentiate that, it's very difficult. When you start talking about that, you say, well, am I using it medically? Am I using it? I'm okay if it's medical. I'm not okay if I'm sitting on the sofa watching the television. But it becomes very difficult in practical terms to break it down. But what I would love to see is that breaking down somehow, so those who are using it for genuine medical purposes are left alone, whether they got a prescription or whether they're growing it themselves.
I suppose, again, it's difficult. It's the limitations of language, I suppose. And one of the things I worry about, again, with the I'm just going to say it's over medicinalization of the argument, is California, 1997. They had 13 qualifying conditions. The 2 easiest ones to fake were chronic back pain and migraines. So California had this wave of sudden chronic illness because then everybody was, that's my safety net. And
Yeah.
I worry that then people that then they'll think of themselves of using it for one reason will then almost continue that narrative to then go, I use it for this and this, and they won't ever question their real use of it, and they won't ever then explore how different sort of profiles could affect them and benefit them. And so there is the can card system. I don't know if you're aware of can card.
Yeah.
So that launches, and that's this thing of trying to sort of allow for I suppose it's a de facto decriminalization of legitimate consumers. But again, it's a very slippery slope, because can cards on literature says if you have a legitimate condition, and obviously all conditions qualify, so ergo everybody is eligible for this card. To me means why then, if everybody can just say I've got illness X, Y, or Z, and they have to have tried one of the treatment, and the treatment can include taking ibuprofen or paracetamol. So there's ways to game that system, whether that's built into the card itself because it's the way it was moving through the water, or whether
it's a step in the right direction, but it's by no means a solution. I was surprised it hasn't got through, in a sense, because it's not changed the law. It's a recognition that the police have got better things to do. Yeah. And I think that's a great recognition, as we've got in Durham. For heaven's sake, we got proper criminals to sort out, rather than these people who are growing a bit of cannabis. And I totally sympathize with that, 100%. But I think you're right. I think cannabis shouldn't be over medicalized. I'm not sure if that's a word, Simpa, either, but we'll use that. Certainly we don't want to over pharmaceuticalize it, and that definitely isn't a word. But I think it has to be medical at the moment, because that's what the law says. But I would like to work to see it released a little bit more from its medical shackles, because it's going to be a long time before we persuade most of the medical community to embrace this. And in the meantime, so all we're doing at the moment with things like this and articles in the magazines and on the newspapers and news is increasing awareness of the benefits of cannabis. People are saying, yes, it might help my condition. They haven't used it already. This is great. Let's go and try it. And they go to see their doctor, and their doctor says, no, don't be ridiculous. And they finally find out they can get it from a private clinic, and they say, that's great. And they're, oh, wait a minute, I can't afford that. So what do? They go to the black market. So all we're doing at the moment is actually increasing the profit margins for the criminal fraternity, ignoring the grey roam people who are doing just their own thing. But, and that can't be right, can it? That's just ridiculous. There's a lot of ridiculous anomalies in this space, and it's time somebody sensible in government, which is perhaps a bit of a contradiction in terms.
We've got about 18 of them. That's about it.
18, is that many, is it?
It's about 18 at the moment, 18 MPs that are about, they're on the ball a small bit.
It's interesting that there's the cross-party support, because we've had some good support from the Tories.
Sorry, I meant generally as just decent people.
You're right. But it's interesting that in Parliament there's cross-party support for this. We've had the SNP, obviously the Lib Dems and the Greens. Labour's been remarkably ambivalent about it for reasons I don't fully understand. I think perhaps they're scared of being labelled as too soft on drugs, whatever that may mean.
Easy fodder, isn't it?
Yeah, but I'm encouraged by the fact we've got some cross-party support for this, but there's not enough of it. That's as you say, maybe just 18.
Well, it's interesting that you say obviously it's not so much a bipartisan thing anymore, really. I mean, we're obviously starting to have more of a rational conversation around drugs. I mean, without getting too conspiratorial here, obviously there are elements of all parties who are working with and are invested and sit on certain boards of pharmaceutical and big cannabis companies within the industry, you know what I mean? So we've got to take it with a bit of a grain of salt, but the fact that, as you say, we can start having these conversations and these topics are being brought up more and more, I think it is a good sign ultimately. I mean, one thing I did want to get your opinion on is we're seeing an explosion, a renaissance, as it were, in psychedelic research or in entheogens. So we're seeing things like MDMA for alcoholism, people using sort of LSD for obsessive compulsive disorders. Obviously, you've seen Vancouver have just decriminalized now, the city. You've got Oregon decriminalized all drugs. They've allowed psilocybin therapy as well. And there's various other places. I mean, there's 200 cities set to vote, I think, in America over the next 12 months on similar sort of bills. And I just wanted to get your opinion on, because you've obviously watched cannabis go, or medical cannabis, as it were, go from being a criminalized substance into the medical space. What are your thoughts on other substances moving through that same apparatus?
I'd like to see that. I mean, in fairness, I'm no great expert at psilocybins or anything like that. I've not, my professional career, I've never really come across them. It's more of a psychiatric realm. But I think probably the same principles apply. You know, these products that have been stigmatized for many years do have some really decent medical properties. And I think, you know, I would love to see them tackled in the same way as cannabis. Let's try and assess that. Let's try and make them more available if they're safe to do so, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the time has come to embrace all these, if you like, call them botanical products and botanical medicines. Because that was the history of medicine for 5,000 years until about the 1930s. So we're dealing, you know, we've only gone slightly mad in medicine in the last 100 years, where it's gone totally pharmaceutical and everything else is rubbish. So I think it's time to go back a little bit to looking at botanicals and plants and their medical value. And some of those, like psilocybin, fall into that category.
See, the sort of the fantasist in me, right, really sort of, I guess you could say, sort of sci-fi fantasy, would be some sort of, again, technological model, right, that is unlocked by having no sort of criminalization of any sort of substance, and every educational facet was used to gain as much knowledge as possible, but then some sort of technological, like Philip K. Dick-esque shamanism calculated with technology. You know, that would be fucking amazing. But, you know, I jest. I derail on purpose just to give it a small bit of lightheartedness. But yeah, I'd love to see something like that. I'd also love to see pharmaceutical grade Olympic Games, where people are allowed to take whatever they want, and I want to see somebody run 100 meters in 4 seconds. I want to see it. Do you know that kind of way? So,
I suppose that brings a very interesting question. Obviously, you get back to the serious, as I always do. No, it's all good. We've seen, so there's Johnson & Johnson, no more T, is Johnson & Johnson. They brought out a ketamine nasal spray called the Sketamine. You've obviously got, I can't remember the company that's brought it out, a cocaine nasal spray called Numbrino. So you are the FDA in the past sort of few years, they're really starting to go for it with formally or currently scheduled substances, allowing them to have marketable medicinal value. So there was the vote recently at the UN a few days ago where they removed cannabis from Schedule 4 in the 61 convention. And I just wanted your thoughts on how much the scheduling system is an impediment to research and development around these.
It has been. I think it was a great day, actually, of getting it out of that, because many countries around the world have hidden behind the single convention. And indeed, the countries so far that have embraced medical cannabis have flouted that convention. So, 50 countries around the world they're not meant to have done it if they adhere to the UN convention, but they've just ignored it. So it was time. That was so redundant. I mean, even then, it only just got through 27 votes to 25 with one abstention. I was astonished with that. But it's so good it's gone. And I think if you look at the literature on it, it was when I did the study in 2016, there's around 20,000 papers on the clinical use of cannabis. There's now 40,000. So in 4 years, we have doubled the literature. Now, some of that literature is rubbish, but in there's some good work. And now a lot of people around the world are doing a lot of good work, understanding more about the plant and its effects and what dose to give and what format to give it in. So it's great. And if we can free up from all these ridiculous conventions, and I think 2 days ago was a great moment in that, then the more we can understand it, the more we can learn about it, the more that the doctors will hopefully then embrace it, and the public.
Yeah. Well, I think the 61 convention, it's interesting, obviously, because it's not sort of superseded. It's partnered, I suppose, in a certain way with the 71 psychoactive convention and the 1988 one on international trafficking. So it's still in a quasi-legal state.
Yeah.
Arguably deliberately so, I would say, because this opens up research for people at the larger levels, but it still does nothing to allow the individual consumer protections to explore their own health and wellness.
Yes, that's right.
Um,
Good.
Yeah,
Simpa, I need to go in a minute. So if any,
can I ask you one final question?
Oh yeah, of course.
So we've been doing
away.
a bit of a light-hearted question at the end of each of the podcasts. 2020 has been a pretty damn difficult year for a lot of people.
Yep.
So can you tell us and the viewers and listeners something good that's happened to you in this year?
Whoa, something good to me. Well, at a very mundane level, I had COVID and it affected me very mildly. So that's that. From my point of view, that's done. That was a good thing in a sense. So I can go out now and not worry I'm going to get it at least for another 3 or 4 months. So that's a very personal level. That's been very good. I think actually, despite the restrictions, despite COVID, I've really enjoyed this year because of the work with cannabis. And we've worked with so many interesting people during the course of the year. We've worked with a few idiots, a few people who are in it for the wrong reasons. But the lovely thing about cannabis is you meet so many interesting people who've come in at it from different spectrums, different standpoints. And it's absolutely fascinating area to work in, whatever way you do it. And there's a lot of infighting sometimes, that I think is sad. But we all actually want the same end result, I think, coming at it from different perspectives. Yeah. So what I'd like to see is the industry working more together. And there's nothing governments like better than a divided opposition, if you like. So if they're approached by 6 or 7 different cannabis bodies, that's not helpful. So I'd like to see more, in 2021, I'd like to see more spirit of cooperation. I didn't answer your question totally, did I? What's No,
that's
I divert. I always divert all over the shop. I make a good politician. I never answer the question you've asked me. But overall, it's been a good year. I've really enjoyed it. And I just hope it's a better year for everyone else in 2021.
No, that's great. That's great.
Brilliant, great answer. I echo your call for unity, and I would actually extend it to all sides, all walks. We need cohesion between the so-called recreational and medical markets, because otherwise we're going to end up missing a huge part of the same with industry.
Exactly.
Until we can grow a plant where the material from it can go towards rebuilding this country, the medicine can go towards healing this country, and the revenue can go towards actually getting people back to work, then we're going to miss this trick.
National self-sufficiency, telling you, that's the way to do it.
Right.
Come in for a hug.
We'll let you go, Mike, and we'll continue chatting for a little bit. We think we've never done this before, but I think me and Maca have got a few things to chat about.
That's all right. That's fine. I'm looking at my picture here. It looks like I'm about to die from high blood pressure. I'm not actually that red in the face.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Change my settings. Okay, no, it's great to talk to you both. Thank you very much for asking me.
Thanks so much.
Right.
Speak to you later, Mike. Peace.
Okay, bye. Bye.
Nice one.
Yeah, nice one. Yeah, I thought since that went a bit soonish that we could hang around and chat some shit.
We can chat some shit if you like.
That's some shit.
No, I want to go back to that fucking my small interjection there. I got a bit semi-ridiculous. It was a bit off the cuff, but you know what I mean. You can imagine something like that, like in terms of a technologically and optimally fucking guided with education shaman-esque trip, like in the near future or something like that, because of all of the collective and open source information that we managed to get, and like we started exploring this interdimensionally, like properly. Oh my god, that'd be fucking amazing.
Somewhere Elon Musk just got a hard on.
That's it. Yeah.
If you consider a sort of neural link and that, there's been, I can't remember what goddamn thing it is. The new Star Trek series, right? In that they have sort of technological drugs, so programmed drugs, right? Yeah. So there is the idea of the next level, I suppose, smart drugs, where, say with there's research done in Israel where they can match sort of cannabinoid profiles to your individual DNA, to your, is it genome markers, something like that?
Genome.
Yeah. So the same could then be done for substances to enhance these trips, as you say. So then if someone's got a susceptibility to more serotonin-based substances, then you could create a cocktail of things in a hyperbolic chamber, like in a chambered room, that you control the pressure, you control the sound, you control all of the motions and shit of, you could guide somebody to, is it word, the perfect trip experience, you could give them every potential to that trip experience, because these things are so, I mean, I've done acid hundreds of times, right? And there's very little connectivity, other than maybe I get purple sky. 99% of the time when I take LSD, the sky goes purple, regardless of what country I'm in, what time of day it is, the sky goes fucking purple.
Right, but if you think, right, so if you throw, so an awful lot of, this information might be slightly outdated and potentially incorrect, but I remember like my entry level exploration into sort of how drugs work, like on like Arrowid. Do you remember Arrowid and fucking Drugs Forum and stuff like that? And it actually had chemists and pharmacists on there, and you'd have to read through like hundreds of organized posts, and you could get some really, really interesting characters on there. But I remember reading something about them finding it very difficult to not criminalize, but make Salvia divinorum illegal because of its base. Like it was base like more than alkali. It was more of an acid than a base, and I don't know how true that is. But if you can imagine, like I don't know if you've ever tried Salvia divinorum. It's for those that haven't. It's very. An onomatopoeic description would be. Honest to fuck, it's you need to sort of decompress after it, but it's not as sort of like stereotypically vivid as, for me anyway, it wasn't.
Depends on the strength.
Well, funny you should mention that, because I have a bit of a story about that. So
come on then, spit it out.
Oh man, all right. I don't think many
yourself into this.
I don't think many people know this, but there was a time in Ireland where like head shops were really, really prominent, and you could get whatever. You could get, I don't know if they weren't spice equivalents at that point. They probably were fundamentally under the hood, but at that time the efficacy, I guess, is what you could say, it was quite low or whatever. And obviously there wasn't any sort of criminality based on it. So you can imagine that it was quite popular with alternate crowds in university or high school, secondary school or whatever like that, that kind of way. So anyway, some bits were duds, others were fucking scary. I won't go into those just yet, but Salvia was an interesting one. So it was basically like this spicy little thing that looks like weed, but it's not weed. And I had it in... you smoke it just like cannabis, right? In predominantly in a pipe or whatever, and you take a couple of hits depending on your not genetic makeup, your biological makeup. The strength differs as you alluded to. But just to connect this story together, so I can't remember what the strength was. It might have been 30 strength or whatever. It lasted for 5 minutes, so that was my first time on it, and it was very, very trippy. I was sitting on my couch, in like an old makeshift couch in my bedroom, like something that you'd almost like dump find in a dumpster or whatever. It was a reconditioned thing, but it was predominantly blue, and I remember doing it. And I had at the time a 3-disc CD changer. One of those old ones that switched CDs and all that, and I had like, I can't remember what it was, but it was like Jeff Buckley, so it was like some like seriously mellow shit, right? And I was like, fuck it, I'd give this a try. I had a can of beer or whatever to decompress, because that was the advice that I was given, and I tried it for the first time in the pipe, and basically had to crawl back to my couch. I didn't know what was happening at that point in time. No, here's the thing. This is only the start of it. So as I'm sitting on my couch, and then I'm realizing that the couch is made of enamel, but it's not made of enamel, because when I scratch it, it just revealed the couch underneath. Now, keep in mind, this sounds like very vivid LSD style, kind of like your stereotypical trip, but it wasn't. It was like this, like this fully controlled sleep mode. Like you were looking through your peripheries a small bit. And it was kind of like I could see the corners of the couch. I wasn't really looking at it, kind of a thing. And then I'd be looking up at the fucking the stereo, going, fucking hell, Jeff Buckley is singing what I'm doing. He's like, I'm scratching the couch. I'm like, what the fuck? I was just like, do you know what? I'll just chill the fuck out a bit. And, you know, after about 15 odd minutes, I can't remember the length of time, but it was short-lived. That you come down, you'd be like, what the absolute fuck was that? And that was the very first time, and I had a small bit left, so I was like, I'd give it a few days, and then I tried it for a second time, right? And this time, it was interesting, because it was a hot summer's day, and I did it out the bedroom window or whatever, and basically, it was a completely different trip. It was a small bit stronger, and whatever way, it was. I had this feeling of like semi out of bodiness, yeah, but I had these peripheral entities that I couldn't necessarily visualize, but they would welcome me audibly, like, oh, hey, how's it going, you know, fucking hell, you're here, it's amazing, wow. And I was like, well, that tripped me out a small bit as well, right? And you kind of got a small bit of peripheral visualization at that point, and I was like, okay, this is trippy. And for a while, that was the end of it for a bit. And for a long time, I didn't need to do it anymore. It was fine. But then, like, you know, there was a time when I was back in that head shop because I couldn't get any fucking cannabis at the time. And I basically was convinced into getting the same strength salvia plus a small bit of this salvia drop extract, which was 120 strength, right? Now, I didn't realize at the time that the strength of this is compounded. It's not an additive thing, not for me anyway, at least. So what I actually did was I filled the same pipe with the 30 strength, and I put some drops on top of it, mixed it together, and hit it. Yeah? Here was the mistake. Nothing happened, so I hit it again. And that peripheral fucking visionary stuff that I had been feeling, right? That actually took over. None of this was in like a bad like acid trip or anything like that, but it was much more overpowering, and it felt like what I equivocate a visual lawnmower. That's how it started. So it was like nothing, and then it was like, it felt like we were starting a lawnmower. Like this, you know, and it was like visually, and all of a sudden I was completely outside of my own body, and I'm not even fucking joking with you. I was in the corner there, up here, yeah, looking at myself sitting on the floor. Wasn't floating, it wasn't a ghostly experience or whatever. I had full representation of the entirety of the room from a different angle in that fucking room, and I was like, oh shit. I was like, grand, I'll just sit here for you know, for the 15 minutes before it wears off or whatever, and I'll be grand. I won't have to move. I can't move. I'm over here. So that kind of way. And then the entity-wise thing again, which was very general. It wasn't very visual. It was just like people in their blobs or whatever. But it's hard to describe because I was experiencing it, but I wasn't seeing them. Do you know that kind of way? I was seeing me on the floor, but there was this whole like welcoming thing going, oh, you came back. Oh man, it's been ages since you came back. Yeah. And all of this kind of stuff, right? So I was like, do you know what? Then I realized it's like half an hour had passed or whatever, legitimately, and it was the same strength. And I had to crawl back to bed. So I was literally crawling like commando style fucking, and then lie down in my bed and basically just shut my eyes. And that it made it didn't make it worse. You know, when you shut your eye, or like what they say is when you shut your eyes under heavy psychedelic use, it could kind of make things a lot fucking worse if you're having a bad trip or whatever. But for me, it was like what I needed at that point, and the stereo was still talking to me at the same time. But funnily enough, just to top the story off, so I tried it again in London when I moved there years later, and I did it in a bong, and again I got it in a head shop down the street, and for the life of me, dude, the same entry, the same entities again was like, dude, all welcome me back. Open arms audibly. Couldn't fucking tell you what they looked like. Was there any color? No, there wasn't. It was fucking weird. Really, really weird. And then, just to tie this all off, and I know I got verbal diarrhea, so sorry, but I found out afterwards then that the drugs form was still going, and I had talked to a 60, I think she was 60. Was she 60? No, she was a hippie in the 1960s, like proper hippie. And I just asked her, I was like, look, what's the maddest shit you've ever done or whatever? And she said salvia, and I was like, fucking hell, what have I done? I can't believe it. She was like, no, I had raw salvia leaves. This wasn't like the cut up powder stuff, and you put it underneath your tongue and it absorbs over time. And she said she was a park bench for a week.
I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't doubt it.
I can't say it. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say there's loads of videos of people having sort of called like salvia fails. I'm trying to think of the guy off the top of my head as well. There was a dude who got famous for gardening on salvia, and he would do various, like, smoke salvia and try and do various activities and film it for YouTube.
Yeah. That's what it was. Sorry, go ahead. Go on. I was just going to say that's what it was presented to me. It was this just this mad laugh that you can just, you're out of your mind. But I didn't look at it that way. That kind of way. But go ahead.
But that is exactly, I suppose, how some people view our cannabis consumption. It's just those idiots wanting to do the drug. It's all drugs have a relevant purpose to the individual, and even if we get stuck trying to call them medical or recreational or whatever, there were certain times in my life that I go to the woods and I eat psilocybin mushrooms, and I'll smoke DMT from a vaporizer. I'll meditate. I'll sleep around a fire. I'll do these things to reset myself, and no one can set a dose for that. No one can set that experience but me. I know that everything I do for that is massively beneficial for my mental health, and I've consumed most substances that can be consumed. So I've had a few salvia trips in isolation. It's often quite for a novice person who's using entheogens or psychedelics, whatever you want to term them, it can be a very scary experience. But say the combination of, if you put a good base changa, which is sort of a mix of various leaves together with something like DMT and salvia in a pipe, it's like a hand grenade to your consciousness. Last time I did it, I took one of my friends with us because I wanted someone to just be like, just make sure I don't do anything stupid. Yeah, I'm pretty well versed. I wouldn't exactly call myself a psychonaut, I suppose. I would
designated driver.
But yeah, just somebody who just make sure shit was all right. We drove to this beautiful reservoir. We sat in like the stony bit that meets the water. I packed my pipe, smoked it, and I had this moment of just trying to fasten my seatbelt. And so I'm like this, sort of trying to sort of get this, and then and there's just this stream of information that wherever I look, it's like augmented reality. It's just present in front of me. And so then I just that's it. I go, kind of look about, lay back, just like that, just laying on the stones. And it didn't matter if my eyes were open or if they were closed. The information just streamed in, and as I was viewing it, it all made sense. I had this, like, I just cracked the code. You know what I mean? I'd opened the lock and the light. I felt like I just opened the fucking suitcase in Pulp Fiction. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was just this kind of moment. And as soon as it ended, I'm like, what the fuck was that? My brain was just, I don't remember. What are you on about? And it's just the frustration of the juxtaposition between the experience and what you can actually, your interpretation of it is afterwards. 'Cause it's like a dream. When you wake up from a dream and you remember it until you try and remember it, then you remember all this culinary other bits of information.
Well, funny enough, it's one of the most wonderful things I've ever experienced is in this context. Obviously, there's plenty of things that are wonderful that I've experienced. Well, hey, that was really shit. But what honestly, like, I felt so fucking serene after it was, I've heard full-on original symphonies in my head that aren't, like, I'm talking full orchestral 40-piece fucking orchestras, whatever, and it's not a tune that I know. It's not something that's subliminally embedded in there. It's writing itself as I'm fucking thinking about it, and it's wonderful. And the most beautifully tragic thing is that my own music ability is nowhere near that level. I can never actually put that out there and fucking, well, not in the current zeitgeist and state of the fucking world or whatever, but I'd imagine, you know, there might be an occasion if I was to lock myself away for like 6 to 8 fucking months, having no fucking environmental distractions, and had that sort of constantly fucking thinking about in my head that maybe perhaps you could do it. You know, like anybody could, really.
Yeah.
But honest to fuck, it was just this wonderful thing. And then I was trying my best to consciously not block and focus on individualized instruments or anything that was happening, just in case it interrupted the flow of train of thought. Now, it doesn't happen often now, mind.
Yeah, so that's a state of satori, or
it was,
you know, it's brief enlightenment. It is, you know, in sort of Eastern philosophy.
Yeah.
Is that, and psychedelic substances, cannabis as well. I mean, even just sort of
that was on cannabis, by the way.
Yeah, quite esoteric practices such as meditation or yoga, breath work, you know, fasting, sleep deprivation. There are various technologies, should we call them for a poor collective term, that we can do to engage in alternative perspectives. And exactly what you said of the sitting in the corner of the room, that reminded me of this beautiful moment that happened in Durham a couple of years ago. I was sat on a park bench smoking a joint, and the heavens opened. And this old blokey who was 80 odd, power walking, stopped in the rain and was stuck on this bench with me. And I continued to smoke my joint. And we ended up striking up a conversation, and we talked about cannabis. And he explained how in the army back in 50s, 60s, whatever it was, he says that we tried that wacky backy once. And he said exactly the same thing. He said that he was pinned in the top corner of the room, observing everything happening, but couldn't participate in it. So it's interesting that we all have unique trips and experiences, because ultimately the things that make up our brain, our neurological makeup, is far more than just the chemicals within it. It is the thoughts and experiences. It is the neurological pathways that are fused through your thoughts, your experiences, your epigenetics.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So then when you take these substances, I mean, even the variant upon have you eaten that day, how much have you slept? Do you know what I mean? It's your blood pressure. Everything else will affect the outgoing experience. So I suppose it's something that isn't really talked about as much as should be, but it is preparing yourself as an individual. Is actually, if you're going to choose to deliberately put yourself in these altered perceptive, in a position of altered perception, of how to deal with it. Because as we were talking about before, about with the salvia, people freaking out, I think everybody deserves to have those experiences, but there needs to be a way that I suppose is a non-narcotic or a non-drug way for them to have an idea of what that experience could be. But we could put 50 of us in a room together and all smoke the same thing and have talk about our experiences, and there'd be very little correlation, really.
Well, you say that, but I obviously am a massive subscriber to Terence McKenna, and Terence McKenna would advocate an awful lot of the time that use of DMT, which I have no experience of, unfortunately, is has a very common ground. People can actually share an awful lot of the trip, as so to speak. Like, there are identifiable entities or something like this that happens. Was it the gnomes that he says, and he alludes to that Pink Floyd song, and it's fucking magical.
It's the this. Let me try and pull this out of my ass. I believe he's a Czech psychiatrist named Stanislav Grof, and he worked with LSD, DMT, and quite a few other things. And he documented thousands of trips. And again, his whole thing was trying to understand the entities and the others that some people meet, and the ways these are expressed, and the way that it affects then the psychology of the people who experience these things. Do you know?
Yeah.
Because obviously they often tout this thing as a reason why we shouldn't have LSD, is one dose and it'll change your personality forever. Nobody's saying that's a fucking bad thing. Do you know what I'm saying? The evolution of your character, of your consciousness, to continue on a trajectory of learning, challenging yourself, and taking in new data and becoming a better person as you go, I would say is one of the founding pillars of being human.
Well, it's also the biggest problem that we have as a human society, in my opinion. Like, you can if you could leave yourself at the door, so to speak, you would find an awful lot more social progression, local progression, global progression. You really, really fucking would. And it comes with the degradation of ego. And I mean, an awful lot of these substances can actually be used. Well, go ahead.
No, so I don't know. See, I've had agreement. It's actually, if I look at it, I think how many is that? There are 7 open blogs that I'm currently writing. one for the Simpa Life, shout out simpalife.com. Yeah, and one of them is sort of discussing this idea of, is ego death a good thing? Because I, at one point for a year solid, every Sunday, did a macro, quite heavy, high dose of LSD with a friend. And we went through our own protocols of sort of psychological therapy and sort of helped each other out, sort of helped look at different problems and how we could use each other's perspective to see things in a different sort of way.
Yeah.
And I found that the more psychedelic substances that I took and the more frequently that I consumed them, it wasn't a case of the less identity I had, but the more content I was with not expressing who I was.
No, you're absolutely right.
You know what I mean? So I think it's not even a case of restraining one's ego. It's a case of befriend that ego.
You see, I don't know. I fully agree with your point. Just conceptually, your ego is your autonomy. Your part of your autonomy. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of. There is no hiding away from it completely, but what I'm saying is, yeah, through the acceptance of self, you become that death of ego is what is achieved. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, so it's the temporary death.
Yes,
what allows
that's
us
exactly what I'm talking
understand
about.
That we are not just ego.
I scare a lot of people when I say the death of ego. You are absolutely right. It's the death and rebirth. It's only part of it. It's part of it. And you're right to allude to, like, funnily enough, it's down to personal want as well. Like, because you can take as much of this stuff as all these substances and go, grand, I'm going to have this death of ego that Mac is talking about and have this eternal enlightenment or whatever. But if you don't have the deep down personal want, that's never actually going to fucking happen. It's never going to happen, no matter how much of this stuff that you take. So you have to have that truly in yourself too.
But you also have to have the fortitude then to do the work. Yeah. Most people want the happy visuals and whatnot in psychedelics. They don't want an experience of, I don't know, say a story that we'll cover at some point, I'm sure, hugging a bath mat in a blacked out bathroom for 5 hours, hoping for the noise of Austin Powers to pass. you know what I mean? I do. I have had hundreds of experiences on dozens of different substances, and they would range from, I suppose people could say, on a good and bad spectrum, but I believe they're all useful. Because each experience taught me something about myself. If it showed me a vulnerability and a weakness and something that I could shore up, or whether it then showed me that I'm a loving person, I am connected with the world, I am capable, confident, and should go out to be a compassionate individual, to seek community, to seek connection. You know, that is one of the main things I think that people are seeking when they're looking for that revelatory experience, is a reconnection to themselves.
Yes.
And I think obviously one thing that's overskirted with this is when we're talking about ego death, is the modern conceptual idea of ego in psychology, is that you have ego, superego, and the id, which are the 3 concepts derived by Freud.
Yeah.
I personally ascribe to, we'll leave, Freud's a whole nother podcast. We'll leave me here for a minute.
Yeah.
I ascribe to the idea of, I call it head, heart, and hara. So your 3 base intelligence. You have your hara, which is an old world term for instinct, gut instinct. You know, when you just have that kind of, I should do something, or when you see somebody just step back and a tire flies by, that's hara. That's this other intelligence.
Yeah.
Then you have your heart and your head, right? And the ego resides in the brain. It is what culminates all of this together. And it then puts this experience of going, and it has this inner monologue that goes, this is who you are, this is what this is, and this is what to expect. And it walks you down this line through experience. Whereas through spiritual practice, for lack of a better wording, whether it be yoga, meditation, introspection through consumption of cannabis or psychedelic or entheogenic substances, gives you the opportunity to address your behavior, to address sort of how you're living. And you can then listen for the first time and often hear these instincts. Do you know what I mean? To really, when you bring it into homeostasis and balance of this intellect.
But I think what you're describing is absolutely 100% perfect, and I 100% agree with it. But like it's almost an approach. Do you know that kind of way? For some people, you're able to sort of do that, and I'm potentially able to do that because that's what I'm doing instead of practicing what I preach, which is what I'm just about to fucking say. But for other people, the ego, you're right, the ego is here, your definition of self, but that definition of self is reflective of the entirety of the environmental pressures that you feel. That to me is what I'd imagine the most sort of common relationship with people's with people with their own ego in terms of their understanding. And then if I'm wrong, please correct me on this. But from that point of view, I subscribe to a different approach, right? My different approach is yours is quite hopeful, if you don't mind me saying, right? Mine is to achieve a level of acceptance through hopelessness, to that
nihilism.
Not nihilism. Not nihilism, dude. I'm definitely not a nihilist. Like, do you know what I mean? But
I'm an optimistic nihilist.
What I mean to say is to a point where, because of my ego is still something I battle with, something that I'm constantly obsessed with trying to actually do what we're talking about and actually release myself from it. But I hope to achieve a level of hopelessness in context to the natural draw, the clinginess of this like environmental pressure that is this my definition of self, that I need to feel a certain way because do you know that kind of way? I need to be defined in a certain way because of my identity. Do you know? I mean, an awful lot of this is chewing gum talk, to use an Irish expression, chewing gum talk. But you see my point of view. It's just a difference in approach. In actual fact, the end point is exactly the same. So if you were, whatever way we talk about this, I mean, reconnecting with yourself, or death of ego in my case, or whatever terminology, is something that we should all seek to do. It's almost, if you want to know what the fucking point of life is, right, start with that. That's not it, but start with that. And do you know what I mean? And if you can make all of that go away, and it can be done, it can be fucking done, then you have a path in front of you, you've got clarity, do you know what I mean? It's hard to do, mind. Yeah. It's hard to do.
Yeah, well, I think ultimately it's about changing, it's about changing perspective. It's about psychedelics and entheogenic substances are powerful tools to suppress the exterior world.
Yeah. So
what they do is, especially, I mean, they used to call it hemispheric connection in LSD. So a lot of people will have seen the famous brain scans of brain on placebos and a brain on LSD, and the connectivity between all hemispheres of the brain is undeniable. The terminology that was most recently used is that it drives the brain to the point of chaos. So it causes hyperconnectivity. So it has a great therapeutic potential, but it also has a great potential that if you can not freak out about the experience, you can come up with some of the most novel ideas you've ever experienced. And you can have those kind of conversations with yourself. And then there's the idea of exploring taking substances together, so polydrug use, which is quite a big thing, especially now in psychiatry, in the psychedelic renaissance, I suppose you could call it, where they're starting to play around with mixing things like LSD and MDMA. You know, the thing like candy flipping, I suppose we would term it. So there's then like things like Jedi flipping and all sorts of stuff, right? There's a whole, because there's a subculture of this. We've been doing this for decades.
Getting names wrong.
But what you can then find is, say, a drug like MDMA was mainly used in research when it came about as a love drug. So they used it in California with married couples that were having troubles, and they found that they basically eradicated their issues because it allowed them to truly communicate. There was experimentation used for a while by, I think it was the CIA, some Western government agency and entity, to try to use it as a truth serum, because it just makes people like the chewing gum talk, as you were talking about.
Yeah. Well, wasn't the statute of limitations up on something recently where the French town that was doused, I think it was the well water or the bread or something like that, had heavy amounts of LSD in it, and that was a just experiment to see if they could be almost, I don't know if it was weaponized, but you can imagine like somebody having a fucking proper boner over it going, I wonder if the whole town would lose their minds.
That was the CIA, man. The CIA for 23 years effectively had a backdoor contract with Sandoz, and they allowed LSD to proliferate. Anybody who was an ology of any prescription to study this and to do unbelievable things. I mean, there's things like Operation Midnight Climax, where I think it was Philadelphia or one of the northern cities in America, where the CIA basically paid sex workers to load Johns back to these brothels where they had one-way windows. They would then dose them up with LSD and other drugs and fuck with them and do these experiments with them. You know what I mean? Again, it's this 30-year rule. Every time that slides up, we're going, oh my God, look what they fucking did 30 years ago. Yeah. And yet the cognitive dissonance in our brain doesn't go, I wonder what
they're doing now. Yeah. That's just it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting. As we've said, we've obviously now talked quite a bit about sort of these substances. And there is, I think, once the argument is dealt with and we're done with cannabis, there is going to be this huge fight and push for our right to consume these substances. We shouldn't have to if we want to go take mushrooms. Anybody who's taking mushrooms knows the best place to do that is in the fucking woods. Is to go out into nature and just reconnect with that shit, leave the world behind, just get in there. If then we go through a medicinal paradigm, the only way you'll get psilocybin is in these little capsules. And if you lay in a clinician's room with 2 specialists, and it's like, nah, man, I want to trip with my mates in nature. I want to go to a music festival like we used to do with Boomtown every year. And on Friday, get 10, 20, 30 of us tripping on mushrooms together and just enjoy that shit, man.
Do you know what? And it's all fucking grows from the ground.
That's the wonderful thing of it. It's the intelligent nature of the universe. I don't ascribe to it particularly, but the idea of Gaia.
Oh, no, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I was going to interrupt there, but go ahead, go on.
So every year we get things like seasonal affective disorder. We get less vitamin D, especially in this country, because of the positioning. The Earth rotates on like a 23-degree axis. It's an oblongated spheroid, and the way this cycle of the sun changes means that we just get some shit light, and the quality of that light is poor as fuck. So we get less vitamin D. Our diets have got shocking, so we don't eat as much good shit. Yet these substances grow without failure every year. You know what I mean? If you want to argue about veganism or not, I'm not going to, but I wouldn't say that we should be using agriculture in the way that we are. But the beautiful consequence of that is these mushrooms love cow shit. They love sheep shit. So wherever we're then creating the meat in this engine of industry, as a consequence of that, nature's given us the opportunity to take these substances and go, should we be doing this? Should we really be engaging in this behavior?
That's just it. Well, to put it this way, I don't know about you, but it's fucking dark here at 1 o'clock. I look out the window and I go, fuck me, I can't actually believe it. It's like, it's probably some sort of repressed, repeated memory that I'm imagining going, I swear it wasn't this dark last year. Do you know that kind of way? Yeah. But, you know, maybe I'm not imagining it. Like, also, you know, if it keeps going the way it fucking is, it's just going to be dark and damp here.
You've only got, what are we on, the 2nd today? 3rd?
Yes.
So on the, what is it, the 18th?
21st.
21st, yeah, then it starts to get lighter.
That's again. Right. And that's what I was saying the other day. Sorry, I'm going to build on top of add my energy to this, because if you're feeling like shit, which I was recently, myself and Simpa talked about this, I had like really high levels of anxiety, and it dawned on me. I was like, fuck this winter, fuck this darkness, fuck this cold. And I was like, it's only just starting, it's December. And then I went, actually, it's the solstice around the fucking 21st to the 23rd, isn't it? It's like, that's when it's every fucking day, no matter how you're feeling, or if you're having a really, really shit time of it, every day that passes after that day is brighter and warmer, just like you will be. Come in for a hug. This is your second.
The serious thing, we're gonna need this on a t-shirt. Come in for a
hug, yeah. But like fists.
It's very specialist merch. Available soon on thesimpalife.com.
No, but you're absolutely right, man. You're right. You're right. It's a good way of actually putting it, and it's not that far. We're almost there. We're almost fucking there.
Yeah, every year, man, I try and get out to camp around the solstice up at this spot I've got in Durham, because I camp there most of the year anyway, so you get to watch the change of the seasons, and it's humbling. So in the forest that feels so dense and so thick when it's overgrown in every direction, that you then wake up with in a winter's morning and there isn't a leaf in sight, you know what I mean? It's the feeling of that loss, of that end, that cessation to everything, and then to know again that in just a few short months it'll be that glorious green that it almost fades from memory. So I think the observation of nature and living with the seasons is something that we've lost touch.
We've lost it. But
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I'm so passionate about this national self-sufficiency model. And I know I've obviously based that upon cannabis and a whole lot. But my actually ideal is in Ireland and in England too, or the UK, should I say, is to achieve exactly that. Is to ensure that, like, our forests, our woods are preserved and looked after, that our soil has the highest level of fucking biodiversity that it has, and therefore grows a really highly dense, I lost my words there, very, very highly dense, nutrient-based foods. Fuck it, I'm going with that. Do you know what I mean? And there's a chainsaw like this, and then our energy consumption and our manufacturing and stuff like that is balanced within that self-sufficient model, so that you don't have to be like a national dickhead. Yeah, do you know what I mean? In terms of being in the population of the world, do you know that kind of way? So, like, yeah, I'm thinking that we're moving in the right direction. We just really need some unity. Like, do you know what I mean?
Well, I think we're in this wonderful thing of. It was stated before that when, I can't remember who said it, it was an activist from a while ago. I'm not going to attribute it to anyone because I can't think of who it was off my head. That when the war on cannabis is over, the war on drugs will be over, because cannabis is the largest part of any drug enforcement association, agency, institution around the world. It's the easiest to smell, to detect. It's the largest in terms of production, and it's easiest to hand the low-hanging fruit, you know what I mean, to keep consistency. You've got Colombia looking to fucking nationalize and legalize cocaine. Mexico are looking to decriminalize all drugs, legalize cannabis. You've got various places that have decriminalized plant-based entheogens, so like not LSD, not MDMA, but peyote, San Pedro, that produce mescaline. I suppose the LSA, like the seeds of morning glory plants and things like that, they would all be covered by it, as long as it's natural in its production, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I think that then we're going to see huge movements around the world, as we mentioned just before when we had Mike on. That there's over 200 cities in the US that are going to vote on psilocybin and entheogenic legalization, so decriminalization, over the next year. And again, where America goes, it would seem the rest of the world follows. So I think there's a great deal of hope and optimism that it's an inevitability at this point. As we spoke with Mike, I just worry that it could be weaponized against us, that they can then seek to make all of this profit and then write an industry, and then they will end up with, imagine it, pharmaceutical cocaine being able to be used for X, Y, and Z, to the point of even potential and an argument for powdered cocaine. Yet they'd still then arrest the end user. There would still be the stigmatization of the crackhead on television, when the suits can go around sniffing the powder and it's all good, but the guys balling it up to get through the night are the enemy.
Just rebranded as Soma.
I was reading about Soma the other day for research, one of the articles that I'm writing for the website. And a lot of these old world medicines, there's a fish the Romans used to eat that's they called it a hallucinogenic fish, but obviously it's old parlance, like an old way of describing it. But there's all of these things in nature, a lot of them that we've lost track of because of, say, like the Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece, which was like these amazing sort of parties in this base of knowledge where nobody was allowed to talk about anything that went on there, and they had access to what is theorized to be DMT from the Tree of Life. I think it's the Tree of Life, I think they called it. And so again, all of this, because of its certain sacred nature or its counterculture, was never really recorded in most of history, so it's got lost. So I think there's something innate to us that we just want to fucking take these things, man. We want to find out what the hell happens. It's the reason kids run around till they're sick. Do you know what I mean? They make themselves dizzy till they're sick. Honestly, it's the reason you see birds
instinctual.
It is. It's so inbuilt to us. You see birds eat fucking fermented fruit. I saw a video the other day of a squirrel eating fucking fermented pear, I think it was, and it was fucking him up. He was like, and then he was choosing to go back to it. He identified the thing that was doing the thing and still chose to do it. You've got dolphins put blowfish around to get high. Do you know what I mean? Elephants ferment fruit in their trunk. You know, this is so inbuilt within us, man, to explore alternative states of consciousness. And I think it is our sovereign fucking right If I have the right to get fat, if I have the right to jump out of a plane, if I have the right to march to the North fucking Pole, if I have the right to climb the highest mountain, I should have the goddamn right to find out what the fuck's in my head and what happens if I smoke a little leaf in the comfort of my own home and see what it does.
As Hicks said, man, internally and externally, you know, and explore space. We're still dicking around with fucking world hunger. Fuck sake.
We're not even dicking around. We're perpetuating it. We're creating it. We're entirely...
but that's what I'm saying. It's like, if it was a fucking... I'll put it this way to you, right? If it was a fucking 12-year-old in a fucking sports video game that was in some sort of management system, item-based management system, they'd have that shit knocked out of the park in an hour. Do you know that kind of way? Be like, put this here, put this here, put this here. Oh, just connect this to here. You talk nice to each other over here. And he has it fucking done. Do you know that kind of way? Yeah. It's not that fucking complicated. It really isn't.
It's not that it's complicated. It's just that the problem is simple. Is there are certain mechanisms that have to exist. They are the cornerstones, the very foundation of modern neoliberalistic capitalism. And one of those is that if you have people on top, you have to have people on the bottom. And to create scarcity within wealth, to create scarcity within culture, we have to have a pyramidical hierarchical system. So therefore there's limited numbers at the top.
Yeah, it's bollocks.
But these systems... these substances allow us the opportunity to live by different systems. And this isn't an advocation for socialism per se. It's an advocation for a resource-based, rational approach to human life. For us all to cumulatively get together with our experience instead of going, here's the Judeo-Christian traditions and the bullshit we're going to... No. Most of us don't ascribe to religious beliefs anymore. Most of us don't really hold these ideas. We only hold Christmas true because it gets us more fucking time off work. We only care about Easter
in this country.
But in the rest of the world, even a lot of religious people themselves as well are recognizing that the rule of the land being set by their beliefs is unfair and unjust.
Oh, without a fucking doubt. But numerically, they're still scary numbers.
Oh, well, no, I agree. And
Do you know what I mean?
This isn't to belittle anybody with any belief or any
faith.
faith.
It's not a belittlement.
I believe the concept, the idea of faith is great because of the power that it bestows on the individual to get through certain events within their lives.
Without doubt. Without doubt. And you do you. This is none of this, like, this may sound derogatory, but it's not. It's like, I fully respect anybody's decision to subscribe to any sort of religion in any sort of way of form. And just to sort of hijack the conversation a small bit, just before we sort of look to wrap this up again, but bringing that back into Gaia, right? The very first experience I ever had about looking at the world in a global, like, we should give a shit because we were all on this fucking planet sort of mindset was in a video game. And the video game based the entirety of the concept. You had the protagonist and the villain. Video game I'm talking about is Final Fantasy VII, by the way, just for any of the nerds that are out there. But just summarize it. Basically, good versus evil, blah, 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 standardized, protagonist, anti-protagonist, but the whole concept was unity in a life stream. Like the earth itself was, had this energy, and we were all part of it and fed into it, and that kind of way. And it sort of hinted at Newton's laws of physics, where I may have that wrong too. Full fountain of knowledge, me. It's like
I would definitely mean
energy can't.
Thermodynamics.
Is it Einstein? I thought it was Newton. Would energy can't be created or destroyed? It can only be passed from one form to another. Is that Newton or is that Einstein?
This is something we should be looking up.
We should be looking it up. But I'm having verbal diarrhea again, so let's switch roles for a second. No, I'm only slagging, but it sort of hints at the connecting of the two of those together, and some sort of energy form. It wasn't a full-on subscription to Gaia theory or anything like that, but it was very interesting that we were talking about video games earlier, and it was the first pointer, and I was like, ooh, that's actually really fucking interesting. And I actually remember having I used to work in this paint shop, yeah, and it used to be right down the road from Kingdom Hall. Was it Jehovah's Witnesses? I think it was Mormonism. I apologize on that. I think it was Jehovah's Witnesses. again, apologies. I may have got the two of them mixed up, and I know they're not the same thing. Please don't destroy me for that. But the story is positive anyway. A lady used to come in and deliver the magazines that were synonymous, and and I used to take them. I used to read them. You know what I mean? I didn't look at them as propaganda per se. I didn't look at them as brainwashing in any way, shape, or form. We had plenty of open conversations, and I was only a young fella at the time. But I remember bringing that up to her. I remember going, "Do you know anything about energies and Gaia and stuff like that?" Not in any sort of like dismissive way. I had like the way I've described it to you. I described it to her. And she was absolutely fascinated by it, and I was very encouraged by that. So I don't have any sort of I don't look down upon any sort of religion in any way, shape, or form. I preferentially isn't something I'd subscribe to. But I'm not atheist either. So
yeah, the wonderful thing is what you've just sort of expressed there is we're all experiencing the same thing, but because of the limitations of our epigenetics, the culmination of our experience, and the limitations, I suppose, therein of our experience, we can only see as we see. So you and her, maybe what she is then, she feels that in the same way, but then she heard or she experienced this thing, and then that is the belief path that she chose, and that is reinforced by that experience. And I think that is true of all of any faith of any description. Actually, it's the reason cults work, is that if you truly believe this thing, it alters the way that you perceive the world and the way you interact.
Yeah.
And so my argument has always been that faith should be a secondary characteristic, as it were, of humanity. First, there should be a humanist-based society, which is the ideals of that are made up of the culmination of all peoples, all beliefs.
Absolutely.
Rather than a few being allowed to set precedent, because this is why we end up with such polarized binary warfare, as it were, for lack of a better word, within the social construct. And it's because of this lack of understanding of going, well, if we can get beyond the ideas that are then built on beliefs, so things about abortion and shit like that, things that have been moralized and separated from the idea of, then if we discuss this without the false moralization, if you discuss it without the, my imaginary friend, sorry to speak of it so divisively, if we can then have that idea of going that this is the facts, this is the crack, that's how we build the base laws. Because most of the Western world is based on what's called the Abrahamic religions. So Islam is an offshoot, I suppose, into an argument to oversimplify, I suppose, of Judeo-Christian
simplification.
Faith, but they all spout from the same sort of
they
thing.
have similar commonalities.
But if you look within these texts, within them, they speak of science. They speak of things that storytelling was the way in which we lived. We tell ourselves stories in order to make sense of our world, whether it's the narrative our ego tells us of who we are, or it's the collective stories of even things like the Big Bang or whatever. We have these narratives that allow us to say to our brain, when it goes, fuck me, I can't deal with this thing is huge, what is happening, we give it this nice easy answer, or this get out of jail free clause of going, it's God, it's whoever doing whatever, you know what I mean? Whereas if we then had this ideal that your faith is all well and good and that's your own, and it should be protected in law, you shouldn't lose a job or lose a home or lose an opportunity for your faith or your belief, but then your belief shouldn't be prefaced over the needs of the many. Do you know what I mean? And this is what I feel is a conversation that is very hard to have without coming across as anti-religion, because as I say, I've had experiences that others who have experienced them would attribute them to seeing an angel or experiencing the voice of God or whatever. But because of, again, my experience and the life I've lived and in my own sort of individual philosophy and ethics, as it were, I experienced that in this way and translated as this way. Do you know what I mean? And I think until we can respect that all experiences are valid, we ain't gonna get very far.
As my father used to say, it's like religion, man-made religion, or social social constructivism that is religious is a mirror, and it's like if somebody held a mirror over the world and just dropped it, and it's all part of the same fucking thing. All the pieces connect together. They all connect together, and they form essentially one overarching. For a better word, Bible, but I don't mean Bible, but I mean sort of an almanac, an almanac, or like a dictionary or something, or a go-to fucking thing, or that is based in long-term experiences and morality, and that kind of way, because it does, there is merit to the morality side of things in terms of organized religions and stuff like that. To an extent. I mean, if you're thought, and I'm talking not necessarily. I'm not necessarily saying, because essentially I was brought up, or was forced to be brought up as a Christian. Obviously, the Ten Commandments is something that I can speak about. But like, it's nonsense. It's fucking nonsense. And as the legendary legend that is George Carlin suggested, that there should just be fucking one, and it's just, don't be a dickhead. And it's I fully agree. However, for children, you need to break that down just to teach them a small bit. You need to kind of go, do you know what being a dickhead is fucking exploiting that young fella over there that has no food, and you were taking it because you're a cunt. Sorry. I'll bleep that, but you know what I mean. It's not necessarily something that should be enforced, but it should be educated. And then does it come away from religion then at that point? And is it just morality? Well, then
I'm not then on about state sanctioned spirituality or anything like that. But if there was more of an open platform within education to discuss spiritualism, and what I mean by that is an overarching collection of any belief in anything, from the flying spaghetti monster to any other prophet or any other demigod or figure of any religion, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that it oversimplifies it. So the whole do not steal. I can't remember fucking, it used to be BBC Two or something when I was a proper kid, and it was an animated thing about like Bible tales. And there's a thing in there about like the moralizing of stealing to feed your family, and it's like, well, that's still wrong.
You see, that's wrong. That is completely wrong. And you're dead right to bring that up, because that is a thing that is told. That is a story that is told. But it provides the wrong moral context in that regard.
But not only the context. For me, it feels that this is one of the things I worry about with faith. Faith is a good idea if it's sort of, as long as you still have faith in yourself and your own autonomy. Whereas if you surrender yourself to the faith of God, somebody that would then hear that fable would then sit there with the family starving going, it's okay, the big man will drop us some steaks later.
Yeah, that's nonsense too.
You know what I mean? So I feel that it can disempower as much as it can empower. And so I think that the issue is over-indoctrination in any one ideology.
Yeah.
So I think that Aristotle said that the height of intelligence is to be able to hold another idea or concept and not keep it as your own. So in the sense that you can empathize with another, you can go, well, if I did believe in God, if I did believe in this construct of this, I could then, I'm not going to say I'd empathize, but I can see why there was such a hatred of homosexuality in the UK and Ireland and in most of the Western world, because it was spat out through the main channel of the church. Obviously, there are steps to reform that are going on. Obviously, you now have civil unions, etc., things like this.
Yeah.
But there is still that moralizing element within it, that there's it's the stupid argument of what just God would not allow you to do something you choose to do, as long as you do not harm another. You know what I mean?
But this is my point. That's my point. Like, it's not necessarily scripture based as a general or sort of non-context bit of morality. Is what I'm alluding to is basically taking some of those basic bits, which are delivered incorrectly in my opinion, or outdated, is probably a better way of saying it, and applying that on a personal level. And that comes from it's hard to do that, but like, if you'd imagine some sort of, not humanist, because again you're subscribing to some sort of ist, like, but what I mean, you know what I mean? But like, if it was taught in schools and it had no fucking, it was just contextual morality, but
just human education.
But
you know
like,
what I mean? Because we have religious education, you have health class, and you have sort of these things, and we have those things, but nobody talks about, just nobody anywhere at any fucking time talks. I think we mentioned this in the podcast previously, how fucking insane it is that any of this is actually fucking here. Sometimes the thought of just that this is here overwhelms me to the point of paralyzation. And as a kid, it kept me up nights. I would be screaming, crying through the night because I couldn't understand what the fuck this is for. Why? Just why? The endless why of why of why.
Yeah.
And I think that obviously, again, religion allows and it can kind of pacify that within them. Whereas I think if we had generations of kids that were allowed to openly go, well, I think this and I this, and instead of being poo-pooed or disallowed into the conversation, the cohesion that would cause within their culture, for lack of a better word, as they move through the generation as they move through the years. Whereas I think then the segregating of ideas, especially the idea of a heathen in most of the religions, that if you don't believe as our God believes, you're wrong, you're bad, you're evil.
Well, one thing I can say as a very generous and flippant thing, and keep in mind I prefaced that, so please don't attack me again, but is like, if the concept of a Christian heaven and hell was real, right? There's no fucking way I want to go upstairs. I know that people have said that shit. No fucking way. Again, this is like back to the fucking thing that Hicks said, right? I want to be down surfing a wave of lava with fucking Bob Marley and Tupac. Do you know that kind of way? Fucking hell. I want to be down fucking rocking this shit out. So in actual fact, I wonder, is it if it was real, and you know, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But if it was, if we actually have it flipped around, and actually hell was this, like, oh, hoity-toity, goody-two-shoes, oh, you can't fucking do this because, you know, you're a good person now, and all of this rubbish. Do you know that kind of way? It's like, surely it would be the opposite, just fucking chaos, because guess what? You're eternal and you can do fucking anything you want to do. So let's actually have some fucking fun and do some stuff. I don't know. People are going to go...
There is a whole thing within mythology or theology, I don't mean to offend anybody by my lack of correct nomenclature there, that perhaps modern Christianity and the idea of Satanism are indeed reversed. The narrative and the modern story has perhaps been so deliberately misinterpreted. The foundational story of the Garden of Eden and eating from the knowledge of the tree of knowledge
was freedom.
Tree of life, and so there are arguments that are made of this. Obviously it's declared heresy by any of the collective organizations of Christianity,
but they finger boys.
some do, we'll caveat that, some do, obviously hugely proportionately high, and they have had countless stories covering this. Is a really good film, actually. What is Spotlight, really worth watching, guys. Hollywood
Amazing.
Movie about
Absolutely
it, about Boston
stunning.
Globe's investigation of this.
Stunning movie.
But yeah, really worth watching. It's not anti-religion in its construct at all. Again, it's just factual, and it just talks about, again, what I've said, that the blinkers that can be put on by faith, that we can go, oh, well, this man, he's a holy man, so he can't do wrong, so I would never question his behavior. I would never do anything other than feel humbled to be around them. That kind of hierarchical subservience that is created through either a system of government, a system of employment, or a system of belief is disempowering to the individual. We are all magic monkeys that shit and are wandering around a flying rock through space, ultimately.
Yeah.
We are, though, again, back to the argument of why. When you really look at this from the abstract, if you take, and a wonderful thing to tie it back to the Entheogens argument, if you take these substances and suddenly start thinking about the abstract behavior that humans create, animals, what we have done with our clothing and our cages and shoes and all of this other shit, and it just blows your fucking mind. And I think that is that ego death. It's that separation of the identification. It's the cessation of that constant narrative in your head going, this is who I am, and this is what the world is, and that's a door, and that's a mirror, and this does this, and this does it. And without that, for a brief moment, you fucking experience life. You know, as Aldous Huxley spoke of it in The Doors of Perception, he said that psychedelic substances are like a faucet, a tap within the brain. We have evolutionarily evolved from the spectrum of light, sound, and all of these other interpretable experiences to only have certain bandwidth. So we don't need to see these ultraviolet. We don't need to see whatever. We see what we need because it's benefited us evolutionarily. But it's not to say that your body is not then still capable of experiencing these other goddamn things. So when you take some of these substances, you get synesthesia, the commingling of senses. So you can smell, taste. You can feel sound. Do you know what I mean? You can really, colors become this noise. You know, this is wow, this whole just woof, and you get this again, this change of perception for a protracted period that allows your brain to go, I'm not this person that gets up and does the job and goes 9 to 5 and stuff. That's the story. That's the character that I've created. That's the person that I choose to perpetuate every day. And with that comes the opportunity to do the integration and the work to go, well, it showed me that I should maybe give up smoking. I'll quit tobacco. I should stop drinking. or I should move closer to my family. I should change this job and chase my dream. I should.
It's your character. You're a character in a video game, right? And remember that analogy I used earlier about building up your character with experience points and managing their inventory and system? It can be applied to you as well, and me. Yeah. And just to sort of caveat this, and I assume we're trying to wrap it up here, but
we'll wrap
just keep in mind. Look, we've been spitballing some stuff here. And
it's been a really good conversation.
We have had a lovely conversation, and we've hit religion quite hard. And I obviously made a flippant joke about the exploitation of children in Ireland, but there's plenty of that. That was a joke. If you're offended by it, don't worry. I love you. I really do. I don't mean that flippantly. Come in.
What does Bill Hicks say? As if he offends a Christian? Yeah. So what? Forgive me.
Forgive me. Yeah. But no, genuinely, you know, we're all cool. We're all cool here, man. Like, and I mean that. Let's just fucking hug each other and get on with it.
Well, this is the point of, again, we mentioned this in the very first podcast you and I did, the 0.5 episode, that we want to create an inclusive platform. I want to be able to debate and discuss rationally, calmly, and with respect and decency and integrity any individual that has sort of these kind of differing worldviews. This is what my whole life has been dedicated to. Is I love talking to people. I love finding out new information, applying that to what I know, and growing as a person. That's my raison d'etre, I suppose, my reason for being. It is what fires me. You know what I mean? Coming around every Monday and knowing that we're going to record podcasts, it really does. It sets my soul ablaze. So again, just to reiterate, I suppose, Maca's comments, if anyone has taken sort of any offense to this, then I would possibly recommend re-listening to what it is that we have said. And if
and just know deep down in our hearts we love you, man. Or woman, or whatever adjective that you want to actually choose to be. We love you, man. And I mean that. I said it again, but I mean that universally. Universally,
our wonderful listeners and viewers, they get it. Well, I suppose we'll wrap up. Yep. So thank you for joining us for this interesting, I suppose, 2-part podcast. You got the wonderful Mike Barnes. We will be putting links down to Mike's website, which I believe is Professor Mike Barnes.
Michael Barnes.
Prof. Michael Barnes.
.co.uk. I have it here.
.co.uk. There you go. So yeah.
Oh, shit. I moved the whole image of us talking instead of the text. And I did it again because I'm a fucking idiot. I have it now.
This is why he's an apprentice.
I have it now. Someday I'll get a hat. Oh, actually, speaking of which.
How festive of you. It is December, so I shall allow it. Yeah, so again, I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Mike Barnes, guys. We will link his website. We will link various contact points for him in the description below. What's up there?
That's the link while you do that.
Oh, link. As always, guys, if you enjoyed this, please do check out our Patreon, patreon.com/the Simpa Life. Every little penny helps towards this project. Do check out the simpalife.com as well for regular blogs. I'll be releasing a new weekly segment this Sunday, which will be Last Week in Weed, which will be a weekly blog basically catching you guys up on everything that's happened in the world of cannabis.
Look at you with all the good ideas, huh?
I have the odd one every now and then if I remember to write them down. Well, yeah, please do like, share, subscribe wherever you are, folks. If you're listening to this on the podcast,
review,
please do leave reviews to help us get bumped up. I'm going to sort out the certificate for the website, which means anything that's linked with our website address shouldn't be held back by the various platforms.
Money.
We'll get there, folks. We'll get there. But yeah, it's been a pleasure, Maca. It has been wonderful seeing you, speaking to you as always. So I will catch you next time. Cheers, folks. I'll see you later. Peace.
I used to think raison d'etre was an actual raisin.